Hallo Freunde, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. Ich muss mein Deutsch üben und hier sind wir. Wir haben heute 4 Themen und most sind Kurs. What's most? Is it meistens?
Meistens, yeah, probably.
Oh, okay. Yeah, meistens sind Kurs. Hoffentlich. All right. Yeah. Hopefully 3 are short and 1 might not be, but we'll see. All right. Up first, sorted set of T gets alternate lookup. 108642. Imo, you're up.
Yeah, so I recently dog-fooded our new alternate lookup APIs. I do a lot of stuff that involves sets, and I persist data back into JSON files, so very often end up with sorted sets just to make sure that the data that I write back is in the right order, basically. And so very often that's why I don't use hash sets. I usually use sorted sets because it seems wasteful to use a hash set and then when writing it out, sorting it again by some order. That seems wasteful. And so I just noticed that sorted set doesn't have alternate lookup because I used it for the hash set, switched to sorted set, and then code stopped compiling. So I was very disappointed. And I pinged Steven, and he's like, "Oh, we could do it. We just didn't feel like doing it." And I'm like, "Okay, fine. I filed an issue for that." And so it seems like there really isn't any real issue with it so far. I can tell by the comments. It's just work, and so it just comes down to whether we want to do it or not. I have no opinions on the shape. I just copied what hash set has. So far, I've not run into any issues with that. It's kind of like the shape that I ended up using most of the time anyway. I used everything except the set property. But I guess it's not too bad to have it.
Yeah, the set property exists for the dictionary property on the dictionary one, so that if you want, you can just store the alternate lookup and not have to also store the underlying thing. And that way you can always get to the underlying thing if you need it. In terms of shape, if we're going to do it, I think we would just copy what hash set has. That includes a try get alternate lookup, not just get alternate lookup, because the get will throw an exception if the set includes an incompatible compare, and the try will return false in that case. All that said, I know Eric had some concerns about not about exposing it, but about the relevance. You mentioned concerns about overhead here. But if you're doing lookups, if memory serves, sorted set is actually a tree. So lookups are actually order log n rather than order 1. So if you were doing lots of lookups and then you just needed it sorted at the end, you might actually be better off using a hash set and then sorting it later on. And I think his general concern was because sorted set is more expensive, are we actually putting, a Lamborghini onto something that's actually a turtle? But I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'll let him.
No, it's what you said, Stephen. And there are a few other issues as well. Like I believe that for the hash table equivalence, we did introduce a new interface, alternate equality comparer, which is the abstraction that sort of drives specifying comparers that support alternate lookups. And for this case, the proposal would, equivalently need an presumably alternate comparer that augments comparer of T.
Why would it need that?
Because the implementation needs to know whether the comparer of T you've specified actually supports alternate lookups. Otherwise, how would it be able to compare a ref struct with the key that you're comparing against?
Sorry, that's because sorted set takes an comparer of T, not an equality comparer of T. Is that the concern?
Correct. Yes.
I mean, we could put we could put whatever our default comparer of T is. We could put alternate equality comparer onto those concrete instances as well. if we wanted to. I don't think it would necessitate a new interface, because for the comparison, we're still only requiring comparing two things for equality or not. We would never be using this for ordering.
Don't we use ordering to construct the tree in SortedSet?
Yeah, but we would never, the alternate aspect is only ever used for the lookups. So you're only ever doing a quality comparison between the T alternate and the T that's actually stored.
But as you're traversing the tree to find the entry, don't you need to be able to compare your span with, the individual nodes?
I don't know. That would depend on the implementation, which I haven't looked at.
I do suspect that we would need something that compares a T with a T alternate. Yeah.
I can look right now. It's possibly you're right.
Because otherwise you'd need to convert the alternate into a T from the get-go, which negates the benefits of this.
Why wouldn't you convert the T to the alternate? Isn't that kind of implied to be cheap?
But then you would need the compare wouldn't be between T and T alternate. It would be between T alternate and T alternate. And to Eric's point, again, I haven't looked at the implementation, but if it actually is, if this is a tree and at every stage and like at every level in the tree, you're deciding which direction to go based on a comparison, then it's not about equality, it's about greater than, less than.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, like that. In which case the interface we have is insufficient for SortedSet.
Remind me, what does our interface allow us to do? It allows us to basically have an equality between T and T alternate, but we don't have a comparison or comparable between T and T alternate?
Correct.
Yep.
I see. Well, sadness.
So Eric's right. Either we re-implement SortedSet in a way that didn't require comparison, or we would need a new interface.
But I think Steven's original point still stands. Like, do we want to over-engineer in this space?
I mean, I never really looked into SortedSet, how it's implemented. I know that the immutable ones are usually trees, and therefore we don't like them, especially immutable dictionary.
The immutable ones are kind of a hybrid. So they use binary trees, but the individual nodes are hash codes. In this case, in SortedSet, it uses red-black trees, if I recall correctly.
Right.
It's actually using the value of the set to perform comparisons, and as such, it does need an I compare of T. And for this design to work, we would need to augment that I compare of T with alternate comparison.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, from an abstract perspective, if you have a sorted set and let's just say it's sorted set of string, and you have a string that you want to substring, the ability to look it up based on a slice instead of calling substring is still goodness, because you have what you have, but since the implementation doesn't allow it, I think that's going to be more the overriding factor.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's probably hard to motivate. Let me actually look at what it said for a moment. I mean, it's not like, I guess I should compare it to a hash set of T. Yeah, hash set is used 12% on NuGet and 42% or 43% of the compat lab, and then the sorted set is only 15% on the compat lab and 2% on NuGet.org. So it is used substantially less. Yeah, I'm not sure that if you have to rewrite the entire data structure to make that work, I'm inclined to say let's not do that. I mean, it might be worthwhile optimizing SortedSet independently of that, and if we do that, then maybe it's worthwhile adding. But unless we are motivated to optimize SortedSet of set, which I think given the usage we are not really, we can just close it, I guess.
The alternative is actually adding the alternate compare, implementing it on the relevant string compare derivative types, doing the specialization for compare of string that we did with equality compare of string. It's a non-trivial effort.
I see. I was about to ask, like, how much work would that be? And would that only benefit SortedSet, or would that have benefits elsewhere as well?
Yeah, because that was going to be my question: is would we be able to use it anywhere else?
Sorted dictionary, presumably.
I don't think we have one, do we? I didn't think we. Oh, I guess that's a new one, right?
That's ordered dictionary.
Oh, that's ordered dictionary. Yeah, but that's different, right? Is it not?
Yeah. So sorted dictionary, yeah.
Which is pretty new. It's .NET Framework 2.0. Introduced with generics.
Years, not 24 years or whatever it is.
It's as old as generics.
Really? I never noticed that time. Holy cow.
I mean, we have a few collections. Sorted set, sorted list, sorted dictionary, and priority queue all work in terms of an iCompare. I haven't looked to see whether they would actually benefit.
Sorted dictionary is also a tree.
So what is sorted in the sorted dictionary? It's sorted by key?
Yeah. So if you're using it for, if you're doing JSON and you care that your properties are written out in alphabetical order, then sorted dictionary is your better dictionary, depending on the performance of the two types.
Is it also in the Turtlesque realm, or is that different?
Is it what?
Presumably, is it similar to SortedSet performance-wise, or?
Probably, because it looks like it's SortedSet but stores a value. In fact, I'm surprised SortedSet isn't honestly just written as sorted dictionary to int, and then it just hides it from you. But it's not. Like, looking at their code, it looks like it was copy pasted at some point, and then there's just like a dot value stacked on the dictionary one.
I mean, I can get behind the idea that if you use, I mean, to me, the reason why you use span-based APIs there is not so much performance as it is just reducing memory overhead, right? Like, because I mean, in my case, what I do is I have a bunch of strings where the string itself is semicolon separated data. So what I do is I use the new span split API where I can enumerate the chunks about allocating new strings, and then I use those to basically see whether they are in the set, right? And so, yeah, I don't really care about the performance gains. It's just, again, similar to most span APIs, I guess you just want to reduce allocations, which I guess is a form of performance. But like, I mean, yeah, I'm not really, I guess to me the index speed wasn't the problem. But yeah, I mean, I guess it all comes down to like value gain, right? So if we generally think that all the sorted data structures, because of their shape, would require some non-trivial plumbing on our comparison APIs that we've done so far only for equality, then I would say let's defer this work to the point where we actually do something in that space. And then once we do that, then we probably want to handle sorted dictionary and sorted set all in one go, and make sure that it all composes nicely. But until then, it may not be worth it.
I think that this also needs some prototyping effort just to validate that any hypothesis that we make about perf improvement in this case. And that certainly was the case with alternate lookup for the case of hash tables. Like, Steven did write a prototype, and there was quite a bit of iteration. So my expectation is that if we wanted to get something like this out the door, it would also need quite a few iterations.
I have no doubt it would lead to reduced allocation. That's just sort of implicit. Whether it would actually lead to reduced lookup times or end-to-end overheads would be the issue. Remains to be seen.
I would really like to see a benchmark that does a non-trivial number of lookups against a sorted set, and comparing that to just doing the same thing with a dictionary and then sorting the final result, like you said, in the end.
Yeah.
So I mean, the notion of saying we want to care about the perf justifying it, that feels like a do we accept the PR? From the perspective of this group, it feels like we could either say this is going to require more work because we have to define the new interface, so it needs work or closed, or we can go ahead and say, and here's what the interface would look like, and let's do it for sorted dictionary as well, and approve the shape, and then let it just not get implemented. So, just trying to make progress on the purpose of the meeting. Anyone want to pick a path?
I mean, as I said, for me, it seems like what we want here, it's not so much about sorted set anymore. It's more about the infrastructure we have for alternate lookups was designed for equality. We don't really have anything for comparisons. Comparisons happen in many data structures. I'm just going over the list right now. So there's like sorted dictionary, ordered dictionary, sorted list. And it seems like if we were to do something in this space, then I think we should make a holistic pass. And then, what Eric said, is it actually, is it making the world a better place, or are we making the world worse because we imply that these data structures perform better than they actually do? And in some cases, it seems like there's also fear that the alternate lookup might actually be worse performance-wise, not better.
Right. But I mean, as far as the feasibility, the one that we care about the most is read-only span of char with string, and here's a string comparer that wrote equals in terms of compare. So we have the ability to do that.
Oh, but this is equality comparison. It's not order comparison.
This is the norm. This is the comparable. It's just it supports being cast to an alternate equality comparer because culture-aware string comparison knows how to say equals.
Right, but
I was just like, this equals is literally written in terms of compare. Therefore, it could write compare in terms of compare.
So there's a compare that takes span?
I mean, it's right here.
I
called it.
That's compare info. That's like the system text globalization type.
Yeah. I'm just some of our default comparers already are set up for this, and the work would just be slapping the new explicit implementation of .compare onto them and saying they implement yet another interface.
Yeah.
Yep.
So while it is a bunch of scut work, I don't think that we would go out of our way to make comparers that didn't already know how to do it, but the default string comparison presumably already knows how to do it. The culture aware comparison knows how to do it.
The bigger piece of work with the work for a quality comparer was making it such that a quality comparer of T implemented the relevant interface when it was string.
Yeah, but I don't think it would be any new types. We'd be culture aware compare, and we'd get rid of the word equality here.
Go to the implementation of compare of T.default.
Yeah.
Ooh, that actually works now.
So the instance this returns needs to be a comparer of T, and when it's string, it needs to implement the interface, which isn't just a trivial one-line thing that required work.
Sure, but presumably wherever that is, because this one is easy as long as that type implements the.
That did not exist.
But it exists now.
Yes.
All we would do is go on this type, and we would rip out the word equality here, assuming that I alternate comparer extends I alternate equality comparer,
And give it a new base type?
No, we would just use this exact same type.
We can't use the exact same type. That's my point. Comparer of t.default needs to return a comparer of t. The base type comparer of t.
Okay.
This is not a comparer of t. This is an equality comparer of t.
Oh, okay. I assumed equality compare extended compare instead of the other way around.
Neither of them extends either of them.
Fair
They're
enough.
their own unique types.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's doable.
Fair enough.
It's just not a one-liner.
Okay. So it's more than the 10-liner that I thought it
and
was.
it involves fixing up native AOT and mono and blah 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 blah.
I mean, they're allowed to return false on all those other platforms.
In terms of coming up with other scenario, presumably binary search might be another one.
Yep.
Because
Actually,
presumably
that's a really good one, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody who prototypes this would want to test the abstraction against, all these cases. I'm not sure if link has anything. Well, I'm not sure if we care about link in this context, but it definitely makes sense to see all the places where iCompare is being used and check whether a new interface would, fit the mold here.
Yeah, I think the meta point here is like we have this alternate comparison mechanism, and we don't really have it for anything that involves. I mean, we have it for equality, we don't have it for comparisons, right? So that's the infrastructure we would have to invest in. And I think the question is, I probably should go back and take a look at our APIs that deal with comparisons and say, here's all the stuff we have. Maybe also figure out how much they are used, and then say, is it worth it? And the answer might be yes, or the answer might be no, right? And I think once we say it's yes, then we probably want to come up with something that works for all of those things, or for most of those things at least, rather than doing this as a one-off just for SortedSet, right?
As part of that, though, we also we added the alternate equality compare, and we used it for this pattern on various collections, but we didn't do what Eric was suggesting. We don't have memory extensions dot contains that takes a read-only span and compares it against a string array.
Right.
So if we're talking about doing something like that for iCompare, that we should first look for where it would be important for equality compare, because there are lots of searching APIs that take equality compares, and we're not currently we didn't add any overloads for alternates.
Yeah, that's also a good point.
I'd also encourage us, though, to make sure we actually have scenarios and not just could we, but should we?
Yeah. Well, the good news is it's all meat for your next blog post, Stephen. So good.
Oh, right. Well, in that case, do it all. Ignore everything I just said.
We should have a Stephen blog post label so that we can prioritize the ones that we think would be worthwhile featuring.
I have that. It's just a draft email sitting in my inbox.
So you said that we have that it's the performance label or something like that.
that too. Yeah.
All right, I assume that Jeremy is writing up the notes from our collective brain matter. Here we go.
Yep. So what I hear is needs work with shape out the alternate comparer and viability of value. So, I mean, I don't think we'd actually think too hard about the interface, but we would need to make sure that it's going to solve the problems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Ah. They changed the sort order. Oh no, there are suggestions. I don't want suggestions.
I know what I'm doing. I have to say I'm a big fan of the new UI though. In general, all the issue stuff is much nicer now.
All right. Thank you, Emo. JsonNode.WriteTo with a stream 108643. Hey, look, it's Emo again.
It's the same guy. So yeah, I was using the JSON DOM and I was using it to process stuff that I then write back to files. And it turns out we do not have any overloads that just take a stream. I mean, there's one that takes a JSON writer, so I can of course do that. But it seems a bit odd because streams are usually the exchange currency for everything. And on the loading side, I think we have it for both sides. I think that was one of the other reasons why I thought it was odd that it was missing. I think you can say JsonNode.load or something, right? Or parse. Yeah, it's parse. JsonNode.parse, and then you can pass in its various forms here. You can pass in a stream, a reader, of course, a string or a span. And then on the write to side, we only take a writer, which seems a bit odd. We don't even take a text writer, we take a UTF-8 JSON writer, so it's kind of like not exactly the most convenient API to use. It's not terrible, it's just a one-liner, I guess, with most stuff, but again, it just felt odd that it was missing, given that everything else deals with streams.
And looks like UTF-8 JSON writer can be initialized over streams, so.
Yeah, it's a bit like what we do for most of the other BCL APIs where we deal with text readers and text writers. There's almost always an overload that takes a stream. And all they do is they just create a text writer or text reader for you, right? And then that's the same logically here as well.
Yeah, well, I know that ASN writer doesn't work with streams because it would only work on seekable streams because when it closes an object, it has to go back and figure out how big it was. JSON is, I think, a forward-only format, so it's different.
So I left some feedback on the issue, and I'm just going to repeat it here. Now, the write-to method is arguably an implementation detail that was made public at some point. I'm not sure why. The existing write-to that takes UTF-8 JSON writer, I mean. So there's a couple of things. Like one, JSON node by design represents JSON nulls using .NET null. So you can't actually use write-to as a holistic way of writing arbitrary JSON nodes to a stream because it's an instance method. You can't use it on nulls. So the recommended way to serialize JSON nodes to a stream is to just pass it on to the serialize async method, which has kind of first-class support for writing to streams. And apart from that, it's already been mentioned, you can just, if you really wanted to use this write-to method, you can just wrap your stream with a UTF-8 JSON writer and just pass that. Yeah, so that's what I have.
So you're basically saying I'm supposed to say JsonSerializer dot serialize and then pass in the stream and the JSON node? Is that basically it?
Yeah, because in that case the node null is permissible, so it will handle everything. Now, it can be argued that the decision to use .NET nulls to represent JSON nulls was probably a mistake, but it is what it is. But it certainly means that write-to is unsuitable as a general purpose way of expressing that.
Does write-to forget, like, not write down properties with null values, or is the concern only if the sub tree that you want to write down is itself the null value?
If the root level value is null.
Right.
Like generally, if you want to model something, if you want to model arbitrary JSON values by a JSON node isn't sufficient. You need to do JSON node ?
Sure.
I don't have any issues with that. I mean, the only thing I'd say is, from a usability standpoint, it was not at all discoverable that was the way it was supposed to be done. I mean, could we do something where we just have an extension method on JSON node that effectively does that, because that would work with null values as well?
Yeah. I think that improves things. No question about it.
There is a guideline that says extension methods should not function with a null input.
Yeah. The thing is, if you're doing it that way, like, you lose the ability to do async. Like, you would be streaming, but you wouldn't be streaming asynchronously. Whereas in serialized async, conceivably in the future, we could be writing that the converter today is not asynchronous, but it could be made asynchronous at some point. So with serialized async, you get the benefits of that, should it be implemented in the future.
But it doesn't fail today, right? It just means it's synchronous rather than asynchronous, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, like, I mean, to me, WriteTo is not the best API name anyway. I was looking for something like save or something in the first place. But, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like.
Like, literally, this WriteTo method is an abstract that is being used to implement serialization semantics for all the different subclasses of JSON node. And, you know, from my perspective, I think it's kind of accidental that it was made public, because, you know, it doesn't work for every value, obviously. Like, it should have been internal in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, what you say makes sense. It's just, I think it would be nice if we had, because it, like, right now as it stands, it's a bit of failure, right? Because basically what I've done, I basically implemented the method myself, but all I do is I just new up the JSON writer, and then I just do Node.WriteTo. It wasn't at all obvious to me that what I was supposed to do is call the serialization API.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we should mark it deprecated or something, or at least have an analyzer that tells you probably don't want to use this API, you probably want to use this other thing over there.
Yeah.
Because then at least I think at that point it doesn't matter. Like, it's not an aesthetic problem, it's just you have the node in your hand, everything else in the BCL, you have methods on it. So that was the first thing I looked for, and I found the WriteTo, and I'm like, okay, I guess that's what you expect me to use, right? So that.
I mean, deprecate, marking editor browsable.never, like, it's definitely misplaced as it is. Like, there's no question about that.
Yeah, I mean, marking it as obsolete at least solves the discoverability problem. You have the instance method, but then it tells you, don't call me, call JsonSerializer.serialize.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Neatly avoids my comment. It's just like, well, where's the pipe writer overload? Now that we've added that to all the stream overloads to serializer. But yeah, I think that makes sense to obsolete it.
And the other thing is that by using JsonSerializer, like, you avail of some of the other infrastructure that you get there, like, you know, pulled JSON writer objects, that kind of stuff that you wouldn't get from, you know, an accelerator method on JSON node directly.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense that the serializer has to support it somehow, but it absolutely didn't occur to me, yeah. Yeah. Should we have an issue for that? Should I file an issue for marking it as deprecated?
Yeah. I would just recommend reusing this one.
I mean, we can just change this one and say we're going to mark the...
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Jesus Christ, JsonSerializer is a huge toy. Holy fuck. Yeah.
Done.
Yeah. It works. Probably should have a diagnostic ID, but yes. That's good. Ship it.
All right. Add span of byte support to cryptography protected data 108734. It's me. Well, chat's being really quiet today. Protected data has two members. There's protect, which takes a byte array and a scope and a parameter called optional entropy, and it returns a byte array, and then it has unprotect, which does the same thing. So this is just the this proposal is just spanification of that. So starting with the triform, and then in the discussion, I pointed out that unprotect is guaranteed to always return a smaller size than the input of encrypted data. So unprotect is safe to call in a non-try manner, and then we just squared the circle. So the tries, the int returning rights, and the byte array allocating ones. The only real question, aside from whether we want to do this at all, is how we feel about the order of the scope and destination in the span writing ones, because scope is sort of an input choice, but it's sort of an option, and our patterns kind of go both ways at this point, of whether it's source, destination, options, outs, optionals, or if it's inputty things, comma, destination, comma, outs, comma, optionals. So
And it's only synchronous because it's basically underlying Win32 API sync only, right?
yeah, this is this is just Windows. It's actually a library that we said we don't make changes to, but it's the marked as critical improvements only. But decrypting something into a stack thing instead of a GC thing is, in some auditing cases, actually critical. So
I mean, from an API standpoint, it just makes perfect sense. I haven't looked at all the overloads here and how they're composed with the existing one, but like as a general principle, I think it makes sense to me to support spans for this API. It's a pure buffer encrypt decrypt API, so it seems like a no-brainer to me.
yep, like I said, we just need to decide, do we want source destination scope or source scope destination?
I mean, you are the guardian of the the overload rules for span-based APIs. I mean,
Yeah, I mean here's the existing shapes there.
So scope is last.
In the existing one, scope's last, and optional entropy is not defaulted. Nobody ever passes it, so here it moved to being defaulted.
Yeah, I don't feel too strongly, but to take the like, I was surprised that you didn't put source next to destination. Is it just because you wanted destination to be the last argument?
So, yeah, so framework design guidelines say it should be source, destination, scope, but then we have places that we say if like 3 buffers themselves are all considered the source, put them all first, and then Kevin argued that means it's inputs first and that this is an input. I actually think it should be source, destination, scope, but I let the last person to alter the proposal I didn't change it. So,
I mean, honestly, I would just not innovate in this space. I would just make it composed of the existing overloads and not shovel things around too much.
Well,
Well-
the existing overloads return the destination, so it's really where are we inserting the destination, before or after the scope?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like, again, I don't feel that strongly, but I thought it was you put your buffers at the beginning and source destination, like one after the other.
yep, that is what FTG says. But
That
we've
works
done it.
then.
We've done it both ways. So
Yeah.
for try protect, it's these two variations. I guess we should probably. We also get to decide: do we want to use the buffer or the overload or the parameter name from the existing overloads, or name it source? Again, we've gone both ways. I think when we're making overloads to existing things, we tend to match the existing parameter name.
I mean, I think you want to, because you want to somehow also give people an indication of like the code that they currently have. What are they expected to do with
Yeah.
it, right? I think destination is fine because you clearly can't name the return value.
Yep.
So
All right. So Stefan thinks this way. I think this way.
That's my preference as well.
All right.
yeah,
Sounds
seems
like
reasonable.
we have a winner.
Yay! Is there any way for me to know what the size of the buffer needs to be up front?
For unprotect, the answer is it will be smaller than the input. I don't actually know the formula because this is just a black box from us, but nothing in cryptography does compression because that's actually terrible for cryptography. So unprotect will get smaller, protect will get bigger, but not much. So basically, whatever you have plus, I don't know, a K will always work on protect. This is actually a weird Win32 API because normally we have like the error more data pattern. This is the only thing I've seen in Win32 that you call a thing and they alloc a buffer for you and then tell you you have to free it when you're done. So they built it with just like, nope, we're giving you the memory with the answer in it, copy it to where you want it. So
Interesting.
Which makes the compliance thing about it needing to be only on the stack kind of interesting, no?
yeah, but malloc and free clean better than GC memory because
Okay.
GC compaction will make clones. So it can be properly cleared with malloc and free and with span, but not with a byte array. I mean, you could pin it first, but nobody ever remembers to.
Yeah, I mean so I guess my question was more like, do we need or do we want an API like what is it, get estimated buffer size or something to that extent? But I guess if the underlying Win32 API doesn't have it and the general pattern is they just create the buffer for you, well then that's kind of moot.
Right. The only way that without digging into Windows code and seeing what they're actually doing and trying to replicate that at our level, the only way we could do is to call it with do all the work and we'll see what the size was and then clear the memory and free it. So it's kind of just the like I said,
Yeah.
protect shouldn't get more than a K bigger and unprotect will get smaller, and those are your guidelines. If you need accuracy, you can use the allocated ones.
And DP API is usually used for small payloads anyway. You're not encrypting entire documents usually, right? You just passwords and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Given the person who filed this, they're not implementing their own form of what is it called? Key vault, right? I hope not.
I actually think that he's as a hobby project writing a thing like, or that he's writing a thing equivalent to a password manager, but But yeah, that is actually how it came up.
Sweet.
I only say this because I know him.
So out of curiosity, with the free thing, like, does Windows clear on free, or would we zero it out as like part of this change before we call free?
Yeah, we're currently only just calling free, and as part of the code review, I'm going to make them call cryptographic operation zero memory before free.
Got it.
So that means the new APIs are more expensive than the one that takes byte arrays?
No, we're going to rewrite that one in terms of these. So
we make
it's
them
going to
both
add a
more.
clear, but like whatever.
Yeah, compared to what else it's doing.
That makes sense.
Alrighty.
And the Linux solution for this is you write to def null. Not supposed to.
The Linux solution for this is write it yourself.
Yeah.
Because it is a black box API, and Windows has guarantees with it that we have no way that we can make work on Linux. Most people probably don't care about those guarantees, but the like 3 people who do would be really upset with us if they found out that we couldn't uphold them.
Right.
So we just said we're just calling Win32, so it works where Win32 works, which is just Windows. Alrighty.
Yeah, like ASP.NET offers like similar APIs, but yeah, on Linux we have to like deal with sharing the keys and so forth, like, or managing the key rather.
Right, because on Windows it works if you change your password on another machine and your domain joined. Protected data will still be able to unprotect it, but if an admin forcibly resets your password, the data's lost, so that they can't change your password and you log in and they can't change the password, log in as you, and get all your data. And we have just no way of making that kind of guarantee on Linux.
I see. I didn't know that. That's cool.
All right. Add unimplemented types for deprecated UI controls 3783. That sounds like 2 things we should say no to.
We should have said no a while ago. Okay, sorry. Right. So first, some history. In .NET Framework 2.0, we had deprecated certain UI controls. We had documented them as deprecated, and we had removed them from the toolbox in Visual Studio. The main problem with them, as we see it right now, is that they are not supporting accessibility. And back in .NET Framework, the previous team had introduced new replacement controls for them. The 3 controls, the 3 categories of controls are data grid, toolbox, and status box. Sorry, status bar. Right. When we moved to .NET, we initially shipped these controls in 3.0, and then removed them completely in 3.1. These caused 2 known reports of breaking binary compatibility for applications so far. And the breaking of binary compatibility is the reason why we are bringing public surface back to .NET 10. The scenario that we have in mind is an application that has plugins supplied by somebody else, and those plugins cannot make transition from .NET Framework to .NET 10. In this case, the application still has a chance to load the plugin and to execute code that does not call into these controls. We had considered creating an assembly with implementation of these controls, but we didn't get a direct request from customers on that. And like I said, these controls are still completely not accessible. We will not be able to bring them up to the current requirements, and we have better replacements. So the team doesn't want and doesn't see the reason to bring back implementations in any shape yet. So besides completely removed controls, we had also removed several properties from existing controls. We had removed untext menu from control, and we removed menu and the corresponding events from the form. This is an additional complication in this case. So basically, we have two categories of additions that I am proposing. We have those properties that are currently on screen, and we have the empty controls that we are returning. Because we have about 800 APIs, I attached file with the new surface rather than copy pasting it into the item. But the general principles for removed controls were that none of these controls can be constructed. All constructors are throwing platform not supported exception. All attributes that were previously present on the type level are restored because they are potentially visible, because type is visible to user code and attributes might be visible to user code. Additional attributes are added to the removed types, such as obsolete attribute, which resolves as compile time warning, and types are hidden from IntelliSense and from property browser in the designer. Attributes on public members were not returned for the removed types case because they are not really accessible, and except for browsable attribute, which was previously hiding types from IntelliSense, because we don't want to start showing something in IntelliSense that had not been shown previously. But in general, it is pretty difficult to get to display any IntelliSense for these types, because type itself is not resolving. So it would be a case of porting .NET Framework application where the type had been present in the past.
So
there
all
are
of this
more
is just make it look like it does in .NET Framework, right?
it
Plus
looks
obsolete.
in terms of binary compatibility, it
Yeah.
looks like .NET Framework, and it has a little bit more hiding from IntelliSense property browser, and it has warnings, absolution as warnings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that means there's anything for us to look at because we blanket approve anything that's make it look like it did in .NET Framework.
So, yeah. Unless you have any suggestions as to how as to so the way I reviewed it, I dumped public surface from the .NET Framework assembly and compared it to public surface of this PR, except for some additional attributes which I was not returning. And so basically, what I need review on is review on the principles of these changes.
Right.
And
so basically, just the
so it is big, but only this example is worth reviewing, sort of.
Yeah. So I think it makes complete sense to me. I mean, it's we generally don't like removing types for the exact reason you're pointing out. The only concern that I have is where are we putting those? And I assume we would put them in the same assembly as the rest of WinForms, right?
Yes, the empty implementation is in WinForms assembly.
So the reason I'm asking is because when I talked to the VS guys, because the VS guys were investigating what it would take to move to core, they did it twice now. In the last round, one of the things they looked into is, well, here's all the stuff that WinForms dropped, right? Context menu and all the other things. And they were considering just effectively taking the old code and shipping it themselves, and then asking us to effectively have type forward entries for those, which is very similar to what we did with Net Standard, right? Where we basically removed registry, but then you have this out of band package with registry. And so MS Corelib has a type forwarder for registry in case you bring in the package. And so the idea would be, well, we don't support those types, but VS can ship a private copy, and if they have it, then we'll unify, right? So if we put the stuff in the same assembly as WinForms is today, what happens in, let's say, 2 or 3 years down the road with some partner, whether it's VS or somebody else, says, yeah, we're willing to do that. Can we make it work somehow? And if we now have these dummy types, then the answer would be no. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is, can we come up with a design where we don't close the door on that, or is that moot anyway because the design would never work?
It should work with we will have to flesh out the properties on control and form that actually consume context menu. But we had discussed it with the team and considered that we had removed these APIs in 3.1 and received only 2 known requests and only for public surface. We didn't consider that it's worth introducing, it's worth moving this empty implementation into an empty assembly and having type forwarders to allow customers to override implementation in assembly with high version. If we get more data, or if Visual Studio decides to move to .NET, we will reconsider that.
No, I understand that. I guess I'm saying is like, is us doing the work now making that impossible down the road, yes or no? And I think the problem that I have is I try to, so take the VS example, right? Let's say we don't do the work. What would the VS scenario even do? The VS scenario would be we adding type forwards to system.windows.forms.dll that basically, which is the desktop identity, right? And we would add type forward entries to I don't know, Microsoft legacy controls blah, right? That we don't provide, right? But then VS would provide that. I don't even know that is doable, because I would imagine context menu, if you actually have an implementation of context menu, would be fundamentally something you have to compile against systemwindows.forms.dll. You can't build that on top of systemwindows.forms.dll. So you can't build it below it, right? But because systemwinforms.dll would have to have a type forward entry for this other guy has to somehow build by itself, which I don't think even works. So I don't think the VS scenario of shipping dangling type forwards would work, because we chose to expose WinForms. The WinForms implementation lives in the same identity as on framework, which is different from net standard, right? In net standard, we have a different identity, which is why we can do these tricks. So I don't think the VS scenario would work at all, unless we're willing to basically completely change how WinForms is being layered, which I don't think we would do. So I guess what I'm saying is, after thinking about this over the weekend a bit more, I don't think we have to do anything crazy. We can just approve this as is, and if the VS guys ever come back, or somebody like VS who is willing to basically ship a lot of code by themselves and own maintaining it, I don't think that we close the door on that one.
If all that we care about is like the net standard forwards assembly, I don't think it would be a problem for us to split the ref into, system Windows Forms DLL and system Windows Forms.compat DLL, and move the hollow types into, say that they're type forwarded to compat. Those should be able to build, even though because it's only a circular dependency in a degenerate case, which isn't applicable because the net standard compat library would build last. So I think we could forward them out. We don't like forwarding out. We generally don't like forwarding down, but I think we can do it. So I think if we need to crack it in 2, we can. Or we could say there's a chance that we think we're going to crack it in 2 later and go ahead and insert all the new types in a compat-only DLL. We can't do anything for the properties. The properties, if they want them to work in the future, that requires actual engineering work.
Well, that would be, I think, the only way that would make sense, because if you can't make the properties work, it's kind of moot.
Right. But
we will
if this
be
is
able
going to
to
throw, then it needs to not throw if you get a working version of the assembly. So it needs to be able to then talk about these things. So then it can't forward the types
properties,
out.
Yeah, the properties would be...
It can't forward the types out because it needs to talk about them because of the properties.
Right. I mean, I think what you could do is, I think what would happen in that world, or might happen in that world, that in order for that to actually work, you have to basically have your own copy of system.windows.forms.dll.
Yeah.
In which case, well, if you recompile the entire thing, you of course can do whatever the fuck you want in it, right? Then you don't even need to type forward entries in it.
Yeah, I mean,
you can just have more types in it.
They could try and come up with a clever plan to get it to work with the existing one with some registration hooks, but
yeah, I think what you just said though, I don't think works, because we don't. So the reason why it works for net standard and corelib and registry is because we have an indirection, right? The framework identity is corelib, the net standard identity is net standard, and then we have the MS corelib facade that forwards to net standard. And so you have an indirection. You basically have the MS corelib facade that can type forward part of corelib to net standard and the other part of corelib to whatever other packages you want. We don't have that here because we expose system Windows Forms from the same DLL on both sides. So there's no indirection, right? So if you have a framework binary that is compiled against corelib and system Windows.forms.dll, on the core side, well, system WinForms.dll has no forwarding facade because it literally lives in system Windows.forms.dll. So that's why we can't do these type forwarding tricks where half of WinForms lives in wherever it lives and the other half lives in some OOP identity because it's fundamentally the same implementation assembly. So I think if we wanted to do that, we would have to cook up something completely new like system.windows.forms.core.dll that then basically becomes the implementation for all the modern stuff, and then legacy one does the type forwarding to both of them. But like that's, I mean, I think it will be a major undertaking. I'm not even sure we can do it now. There might be a breaking change. But yeah, it's going to be like, I don't think what we do here makes this any harder. I think it's fundamentally not a sound architectural proposal from the VS guys as it stands right now.
If a type is not found in the assembly it's supposed to be in, does the runtime search the rest of the load context for type forwarded from?
No, type forwarded from is only used by the serializers to decide what identity to serialize it under.
Gotcha.
The runtime has no knowledge of this.
So we would have to have the type forwarded to in system Windows forms.
Correct.
Which means the runtime needs to talk about. Well, it means the runtime needs to be able to build against the ref of the compat library, which probably can't build because it would need to build against the ref of the the ref of system Windows forms. Yeah, it might work, but it'd be a knife edge.
Similar to what we had done with binary formatter, with having one assembly empty, and WinForms DLL forwarding to that empty assembly, and the user of Visual Studio providing another assembly with higher version
But we didn't forward binary formatter. Binary formatter works by the inbox version is now pinned at a what did I pick? 8.1, and the NuGet package has a higher version. So if you reference the NuGet package, you replace the whole DLL. So
yeah.
So this would be there would then be two builds of WinForms, and they'd have to pick WinForms with context menu.
But I think that's the same trick that I just said earlier, right? The reason it works is because binary formatter doesn't live in core binary or in anything else, but it lives in its own identity already on core, which we can cleanly replace. That's not the case for this case, right? Because we basically munched both controls and the other thing in the same assembly, and we chose to do it in the same assembly as framework. So you have no indirection. You only have one thing to play with, and in order to split that into two, these two things have to have circular dependency somehow. Which I mean, yes, you can build circular dependencies, but we don't want to. And so I think fundamentally, like, I don't think it's a sound way, because the code has to live somewhere else. The code wouldn't live in .NET runtime, right, the repo, because it would be owned by VS. So I don't think that, like, if you want to make that work, which is basically what we did for binary formatter or registry, we would have to factor, I think we have to refactor Windows Forms entirely. And even then, I'm not sure we even can. I think by us choosing the same identity, I think we kind of
no, we can't. We would
close that door.
Core would still need to have a library called system.windowsforms. But if we exploded WinForms into 11 different assemblies, it would just need to type forward every type and reference all 11. They just can't reference it. And so then when you say I want system.windows.forms bang system.windows.forms.form, that would find a type forwarded to system private WinForms core, and it's like whatever. So
no, that part I agree with.
So that would work.
I think fundamentally though the problem is still that the you can't build the other thing cleanly still.
Yeah, I think
because the other thing has to reference WinForms somehow.
Yeah, I think a VS or whoever deciding they want to make context menu work, that will require some dedicated engineering of some sort.
I suspect what would happen is we would have to if-diff the code base.
And then they build it as a NuGet package with a higher version?
Well, either that or they just match ours, right? And then just hack the target frame, or hack the implementation on their side to just include that one.
Right, but if they use standard loading, then the share, if they don't have the thing that says you need to use my copy because it has a higher version, then it would use the one from the shared runtime, unless they're building standalone, in which case they can do whatever they want.
Right. Yeah, I think I think what would happen is we would have to, if there's the code base, to basically just make it so that the dummy types are excludable, and then effectively they would build their own code base with the actual implementations of those. And then at that point, they own the servicing of system Windows on forms.dl in the context of VS, right? That, I mean, it would be doable. It would just be very different, but I don't think anything else would work due to the fact that these other controls are circular, mutually dependent on WinForms. So like you have to build the whole thing in one go. You can't have them cleanly separated out where we own the core and they just own these legacy controls, because yeah, you can't make that work, I think.
All right, so I think what we're saying is,
I think it's fine. I think it makes obviously the everybody who has to move to core easier. And since VS is not moved to core anytime soon, you know, we can defer that.
Yeah.
And we have one diagnostic ID for all of them, right?
No, I have 3 diagnostic IDs split by control types, like for menu, for data grid, for status bar, and toolbar, I guess 4.
Out of curiosity, why? Why would I want to suppress one of them and not the other?
You might be using context menu only. And the other reason was that I'm the message says replace context menu with context menu strip or data grid with data grid view. I wanted to have distinct message based on.
Well, the message makes sense. I mean, but you could still have the same diagnostic ID for all of them, right?
Oh, I see. Sure.
Because
okay.
I mean, I guess my argument is none of them work, right? So they're all dummy types.
Yeah.
So if you use any of them, nothing good is going to happen. But if you decide that, you know what, I don't care, like, then you don't care, right? Like that's at that point, why would I care about one but not the other, I guess?
Okay. So all these obsolete types are under the same ID, because we had obsoleted some types in the past. An accessible object that was unlikely to be used at all, right? That would be a completely different category. I wouldn't want to combine everything obsoleted into the same error. Or
I mean, it's just a question of if you use any of them, you're presumably going to add a no warn, WFDev 007, and it's should all of them have the same no warn or a different no warn, and assuming we can have different, I guess it makes perfect sense we can use the same diagnostic ID with different messages.
Okay.
So it's basically a different diagnostic ID for each wave of times we made something obsolete.
Right.
Makes sense.
Do you even need public constructors?
Sorry?
Do you even need public constructors?
She said she wanted them just so they can throw.
I wanted them to so that they can throw. If there were no public constructor in the past, I made sure to add private constructor, so that there is no new public constructor.
Yeah, I guess my argument is if there are no public constructors, you can't really construct any of them, so nothing really has to throw, right?
But
well, if there are no public if there are no defined constructors, then they're all constructible as default. As all the fields being null, or whatever the field initializers say to do. If you add a private constructor on an unsealed type, that would break if somebody had derived the type. If it had no declared constructors, the correct answer would be a public constructor with no arguments, because that every type in .NET has one of those if you have no other constructors declared.
I mean, presumably the derived types won't work because it's like, our constructor currently just throws anyway, right?
Yeah, but
So
I
the
don't.
only
If the base type is missing a callable constructor, I don't know if that's a type load error or an instantiation error, and we're trying to avoid type load errors.
I guess that's fair.
We don't care about anything working. We just want the types to load. So.
Well, but then I guess, I mean, I don't know enough, but then at that point it seems like whatever constructors exist, you want to have all of them.
Right.
Yes. Otherwise, I'm getting missing constructor exception from JIT.
Right. And you don't need any other members? What happens if the derived type overrides? I mean, isn't that the same problem?
Protected I return protected internal.
I think the plan is all the public or all the externally visible members are coming back.
Right.
Oh, I see.
So this is here partial.
So you bring basically all the metadata. You just make the type effectively uninstantiable.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think. Yeah.
Except for enums.
I mean, at that point, I mean, it might actually be easier to just bring the entire thing. I mean, just make it all throw.
Wait, sorry. What do you mean bring entire thing?
Like basically have the entire metadata from the old types, all of the methods, all of the members, like except for the ones that are private, right? You don't need those. But like, it seems like the entire public API service, if you have it, that means nobody could have written code now that will fail with metadata errors, right? It just means if you try to instantiate those types, it won't work. But everything else is going to work.
But they will not be able to read metadata of the properties.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I wouldn't play any tricks on, we don't need those members. I would just say if it's public or protected, bring it. If it's private or internal, strip it. And then basically everything is going to work, right? Reflection is going to work. The only thing they can't do is activate it.
Right. And you are saying keep all attributes on all public methods. Right?
I probably would, because I mean, I don't know what the designer does, but it seems like, why, I mean, if you bring in that much metadata, you might as well bring the rest, right? I mean, you're not saving much at that point.
Designer will not be able to see these types because they're not instantiated on designer surface.
No, I mean, I understand that. I'm just saying, like, I mean, I don't know what the designer does in terms of, cracking open system winforms.dl and starting reading attributes, right? You don't want that guy to fall over because, I couldn't find the bitmap icon or whatever, right? For whatever reason, right? Like, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, in terms of just being able to reason about it, it just seems easier to just bring, all the metadata except for private and internal.
Okay.
Like, I mean,
right, assuming we are already bringing in so much.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like once you bring in like 5 kilobytes worth of metadata, you might as well make it 5.5.
I mean, if there's an attribute type itself that you otherwise didn't need, well, first of all, you get to decide whether or not you actually need it now. And but yeah,
I doubt it. I think all the other ones are needed already.
I would just as Zemo said, start with copy and paste, basically the ref set, and then replace the throw null bodies with empty bodies. And make the constructor.
Wait, no, I was planning to replace all throw null with throw new platform not supported exception.
Fair enough. If it's a void method, if it's a void method, you could get rid of the throw because it's not callable. So.
Yeah, I would say if all the constructors are throwing, you don't need throw statements in all the members. That just bloats IA. That just bloats IL.
Yeah, just for consistency.
Sure, whatever. It's only a few bytes.
Yeah. Be careful. Like throw statements are actually not that cheap. That's why we did throw null exceptions in. But because you're bringing like thousands of members, probably, right? So like I would not. Like if you only need like the constructors to throw, right? The members, there's nothing to throw. The only thing is kind of like methods that return. You probably want throw null in there just to have it verify, but
I guess
I
it's
would
true
not
that,
bother with,
yeah, they can still say is throw null because they'll never get called.
because you can't call them. I mean,
Yeah.
like you would have to have an instance which you can't get because all the constructors explode.
Yep.
Oh, I like the suggestion about having throw null everywhere
Yeah.
instead of throw not supported.
Except for the constructors.
Yeah.
Throwing null is mean. Don't do it. But uncallable code saying throw null is fine.
And if it's
If
void
it
returning,
doesn't, sorry.
if it's void returning, I probably wouldn't even do that.
Yeah.
Because it's, again, you just blow up metadata for no reason. The only reason to have throw null is to have it verify.
To have it verify what?
Because you load the assembly, right? You want the you want the JIT to read the type, right? But if you have methods that say they return something and there's no statement in it, the JIT won't like that.
Yeah, to have return statement, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Success.
Yep. All right. And with that, the board is clear.
For now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanya?
And good luck.
Shouldn't we also have is the meeting done?
Sort of. If you have a question for the meeting,
Yeah, I was kind of expecting we'd revisit the JSON defaults one that we skipped last week. I thought I marked it ready for review, but
Yeah,
I'm surprised it's not in the board.
I know I flipped it. I tried flipping it back to needs work because you flipped it to ready for review before the status mail went out, but then
Oh, okay.
but the tool never picked it back up, so then I flipped it back to ready for review. So I can't find things that aren't in the tool, so you're gonna have to find the issue.
Yeah, just a sec.
I mean, the tool definitely doesn't have a bug, so.
No, absolutely not.
No, never.
Right, I have it. Oh yeah, it has no label. So yeah, the tool is pretty accurate to not showing it.
So what's the number?
It's
Or
108
justify the label.
526.
506?
526.
26. It says ready.
Yep.
I just flagged it actually. So
Okay.
No,
What was it?
shows up.
It had
right.
none, because apparently me putting the label back didn't save. Okay. Sorry.
Right. So where we left it last week was there was a sort of consensus of calling this secure web, if I recall correctly, or web secure.
I think it was
web
strict web
rather.
or something. Yeah, web strict.
Web
That was
strict.
it.
Right. So I kind of thought about this more after the meeting, and it turns out that we don't want to call it web because it very actively avoids certain of the settings that web currently opts you into, like case-insensitive property binding and allowing treating binding strings into numeric properties.
So therefore, it's stricter.
Therefore, I don't think it should include the term web, because that would create an implicit association as if this is an iteration over the web defaults.
Which
so
it is.
I think we...
And that's the
Sorry?
point, right? Because it uses, well, I think it's very important that when serializing, it uses camel casing by default. But yeah, if we stop doing that.
Yeah,
then,
he said it won't anymore.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right. So
I remember this email now.
I striked out the camel case property naming policy because last week some of you expressed the feedback that this does not pertain to kind of the security angle that this set of defaults is going for. So instead, it's just focusing on the remaining bullets. In which case, I think we could pivot back to calling this strict, or as probably initially proposed in the issue, hardened, or a variation of that term. Because at this point, it kind of solely focuses towards, security-oriented things.
So what I don't love about hardened is it implies that like the defaults are soft, which like I mean maybe to some like right like it seems more of like where you're saying the defaults are insecure, which if they were right we would change them. Like isn't it more strict?
I mean, the duplicate property handling, one could argue, nobody's saying that the defaults of STJ aren't secure, but it's definitely the case that we've learned of, new potential vectors since these defaults got released. So it definitely doesn't reflect a state of the art of what we consider a secure configuration, right?
Well, so on that point, I think the default should be secure, which is why when we reviewed the new option to configure what to do during duplicate properties, I argued that the default should be stricter. And I think there was general consensus that we should do that.
I think people will be coming at us if we ever so slightly change the serialization defaults. If this, I think I made this point last week, if we were shipping this as an independent library, then sure, we can do that. But given that the fate of SDJs, irrevocably tied to the fate of the new releases of the .NET SDK, I don't think we have the flexibility to be as aggressive. Because people will be updating to .NET 10, and suddenly, they will start seeing random deserialization crashes because we decided to make the default stricter.
To the extent that happens, right? Like it's better to do it early and to like have the exception message like reference the app context switch you can save, use temporarily as you then switch to use the looser option for that use case. Because the truth is, right, that the vast majority of people are going to use the defaults no matter what. And if we actually think it's insecure, we should fix it. If it's not, then it's strict. It's not hardened. It's just strict.
Okay, fair. If the issue is concerning the name, then fine. We can leave out hardened. I don't think we should imply that the defaults are insecure because that's not the case.
Right. Yeah, it's a separate discussion, I think, a little bit, but they're related. So I see why you bring them up. But yeah, anyway, I like strict for this name. Is this quorum? Should we just wait for next time? Does it need to be rushed?
Looks like we have quorum.
All right.
So the one concern that I have is like, I kind of agree with Eric's sentiment, we can't randomly rank people. But I also agree with Stefan in that, like, let's say we ship it now and we call it hardened. In 2 years, we have the same fault and we ship the feature with the wrong default. And now what is the next course then? Are we saying hardener? At some point we run out of phrases to describe a stricter, more secure, more hardened default, right? And so I feel like we need it because honestly, like I just don't buy the argument that we get it right this time. Because we keep innovating in the serializer, we keep adding type system features. We will eventually add, I don't know, discriminated unions or whatever else C# builds, and then we will get some of them wrong. Like that's just the nature of the beast.
Absolutely, and I don't think that we would be using the strict nomenclature to opt you into features that relate to the evolution of the language. We would be using it to opt you into safeguards that protect you against newly discovered vectors, right? So I wouldn't necessarily.
But how does JSON string enum converter participate in that? Like, the numbers are fine. They're not changing the strictness. You're changing an opinion of how they write down. Changing allow integer values to false is being stricter, but deciding strict writes them down as strings and default writes them down as numbers. That's not a strictness thing. That's an opinion.
That's fair. That's fair. The reason why I didn't strike that one out is precisely because of the allow integer values angle. But like, if you feel that this isn't appropriate for the context of strictness, then we can strike that out as well. Although I think that would be a missed opportunity.
Well, because the question is, and this is part of why I wanted web in it before when it was sounding like web, is it's strict compared to what? So if you just have default and strict, I assume that is everywhere that default had a loosey-goosey option, set it to not allow loosey-goosiness. But changing numbers to strings is not that. And so this is now, it's a reasonable set of strict with some opinions. And that's the thing that your exercise was to come up with a name before you came back.
Yeah, I mean, again, I kind of thought about this and I figured that the allowed integer values would be justification enough to include this, but if you feel that this isn't the case, I think we just strike it out because, like I said, the focus is strictness.
Right.
I wouldn't want to expand this to anything beyond that.
Like, I can understand the notion that people think that the strings are the better format, but if we just have like default web and strict, that sounds to me like strict is default with strictness. And that means everything should still write the way that it wrote, but reading is going to be less forgiving. And this changes the way something writes.
Yep.
So that's just me as seeing these three options with no, nothing else carrying along with it. And
but I don't know, like there seems to be still this issue that what happens in the down the road. Are you basically saying that if we have something like strict, it means we will break you down the road if we find something that isn't strict enough?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So you're still advocating for we add an enum member called strict or hardened, right? And so what I'm saying is what happens in 2 years down the road when we find another thing where we messed up the default and didn't make it strict.
That's where the versioning suffix comes into play. Like, we acknowledge from today that this feature set is not set in stone, right? This is an evolving thing. And, it might be the case that, these defaults were introduced, I don't know, back in .NET 5, presumably. It might be the case that in .NET 15, we have a critical mass of new mitigations that we wouldn't want to force as a default, but it might make sense to bundle into a new set of defaults, basically. In which case, a versioning scheme becomes almost mandatory.
You could, a couple things. I think maybe in Eric's defense, you could make an argument for string enum converter being stricter in the sense that if you don't care about binary compatibility, that the names of enums are probably more stable in general. But, there's an argument. As far as the versioning, I would not, if we want to add v2 to the next one, sure. And I think it's a matter of we'll have to wait till we see it as far as the next strict option we see. If it's something that's causes problems that won't break hardly any apps, maybe if it's only gonna it's kind of like the decision to support duplicate properties in general. Maybe Eric says no, but I don't think we've completely decided yet. Or maybe we have. But if it caused enough CVEs or something in ASP.NET Core apps, right? Or something, we might consider changing, say, the web default, or
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the web defaults are currently exploitable by the same type of attack that is induced by duplicate properties, because property binding is case insensitive, in which case you can follow the exact same type of attack by specifying two separate properties that are like nominally separate because JSON itself is case sensitive, but the web defaults are problematic in that regard.
I assume though that like with this new individual option to prevent duplicates, that works well with case sensitivity, right? Like we talked about that. Like that will prevent duplicates. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So the defaults are bad, but there's a way. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and we should change the defaults, in my opinion. But like again, like even for web, as far as that goes.
Yeah, so my concern with the bare name strict or the bare name hardened or anything like that, just going back to the string enum converter, is there's the adage, which is wrong, of be strict in what you write and lax in what you receive. The correct answer is be strict in what you write and strict in what you receive. But going under that, if you serialized out something using default being the word we use when there's no other word that we want to use, and then you decide to read it back with strict, that to me sounds like it should read what was written with default, and it won't. And that's my concern of why this needs, if it's going to change anything about how it would write/read something off of default, being the writer, then it needs a different name.
Yeah, you've convinced me. Can we just lop that off of strict?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah. I think you've convinced me as well. So.
Yeah, and so if we want to have a thing that is strict and default, and we can either decide that strict is always going to be willing to undergo a breaking change, or we could decide to version it in the future. But strict really only applies as soon as you have the word, as soon as you have the concept of or. And as long as we think we've already eliminated all the places that have or, then every new feature that we write, strict would just start with the no or, and maybe default says it's going to be lax and allows the or. But if we're just talking about strictness, then discriminated unions, however we write them down first, strict would need to always read that, because that's an opinion on the shape, not the strictness in the parsing. And
I mean it's a reasonable invariant that we'd want to observe. And again, I'm kind of thinking again about what Stephen proposed earlier, like, what if we, ditch the whole serializer defaults malarkey and instead focus on making this the default behavior, like the feature switch might be a tool that we can use to unblock users that are impacted, but this disruption that this is going to introduce will be significant. And I don't know if doing this in an LTS release is advisable or not as well.
I do think the app context switch, mitigates the LTS aspect of it. And it's Stefan. At first I was like, is he talking about Tope?
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I've learned the difference. So when we talked about the duplicate property handling, my opinion then was that 10 goes out the door unchanged, assuming that people are going from 8 to 10, and we've just now added the feature, and there's no way for them to set it in code. But that in 11, we change it to the default is that duplicates are banned. And as long as we don't get too much negative feedback in 11, then in 12, duplicates are now banned. And somebody has to opt in.
Right. Exactly.
Adding strict means that you get, strict means you want to opt in to changes like that sooner. But again, I think we've gotten rid of, I don't know that there's anything left where we're reading that we say it has ambiguous state. And, I could be wrong, but, and so in that case, it's only about future options and future features, and we should honestly decide that strict is our default and leave an option for somebody to make it looser, unless it's one of those things where, well, it's a feature that came out of like Chrome invented it and did it this way, and then Safari did it this other way, and there's really no such thing as a good default, so by default we support reading both. But then strict is going to pick one, And so somebody will say one of them is the right answer. But
Yeah, I just to follow on, like I'm not a fan of adding like a version to the initial strict thing. Like I think there's a chance that it does undergo some minor changes or have a difference from the default for like new features perhaps. But like versioning it ahead of time seems premature. And like even if we are wrong, adding a strict v2 after the fact is not the end of the world. And we might even have like a better name.
So yeah, if we want to make a JsonSerializer option / JsonSerializer defaults dot strict that is read compatible with what general writes, I'm fine with that. Sorry, general / default. Then I'm personally fine with that. But if it's not going to be compatible with what default / general writes, then it needs a different name.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
And then yeah, it's up to you of if the next net adds another option that default didn't have set, if strict is just more eager to take breaking changes, I think that would be fine. I mean, we just have to publish them. We don't have to not do them. And then once this strict isn't set in camel case and isn't using JSON string enum converter, then we're back to, and it's a thing that somebody brought up in chat, like Azure's not going to use it. They're going to say, you know, static read-only JsonSerializer options, Azure serializer options, clone it off of strict, and then change the things that they want to change. So
if you're talking about Azure SDK, they're not even using JsonSerializer in the first place. They
I'm going with the title.
Right. Yeah.
That's better tailored to Azure applications. Presumably the Azure applications want these top 2 bullets, and we've just said no to them. So they're not going to use this thing. They may use it as a seed for their own options, because I think options supports being constructed from another set of options.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a win. Like, I mean, it's not a complete win from their perspective, but I think that's something. Because, like, chances that we were going to, like, stay aligned with people in Azure on every single thing, I don't know. Unless we gave them ownership of it somehow. Seems unlikely.
No semicolon after the namespace. All right. Are we happy enough?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
The board is clear for the second time, and we're almost out of time, and I'm hungry, so nobody's allowed to flip anything else to ready for review. So.
Got a 5-minute one. No, I'm just kidding.
Yep.
See everybody.
Yep. So thanks everyone for joining us online, especially when we went into overtime, though still in our time slot. And assuming something else gets opened in the next 7 days, we'll see you at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.